Welcome to the Zweig Letter Podcast, putting architectural, engineering, planning, and environmental consulting advice and guidance in your ear. Zweig Group's team of experts have spent more than 3 decades elevating the industry by helping AEP and environmental consulting firms thrive. And these podcasts deliver invaluable management, industry, client, marketing, and HR advice directly to you, free of charge. The Zweig Letter Podcasts, elevating the design industry one episode at a time.
80 years. That's how long Tarlton Corporation has been building St. Louis. And in 2026, they're marking that milestone with a leadership transition that's been years in the making. My guest is Sondra Rotty, and she is the newly elected president of Tarlton Corporation, one of St. Louis's largest general contracting and construction management firms. Sondra joined Tarlton in 2005 as a project engineer, was named chief operating officer in 2024, and has now been elected president by the company's board of directors, while retaining that COO role. Her fingerprints are on some of St. Louis's most iconic projects: the historic renovation of the old courthouse at the Gateway Arch, the Olin Business School expansion at Washington University, and the St. Louis Art Museum's East Building addition, among others. She also serves on multiple boards, including as treasurer for the Missouri Gateway Green Building Council and chair of the building division for the AGC of Missouri. Sondra, we want to welcome you to the Zweig Letter Podcast. So glad we made this happen. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing great, and I'm excited to be here. And I'm excited to, I'm fangirling because I know you've done over 2,500 podcasts and you're spreading knowledge like crazy, and I'm happy to contribute. I hope I can contribute.
I appreciate that. No, everybody that has done a podcast with me has contributed, so it's all good. And certainly this will be your chance to kind of share your story. And speaking of which, I would love for you to kind of take us back to the beginning. As I mentioned at the opening, you joined Tarlton in 2005 as a project engineer. You are a Missouri S&T architectural engineering degree graduate. What drew you to construction management specifically, and what were those early years at Tarlton like?
Yeah. So I would have to back up a little bit further to my college experience and some internships that I was fortunate to have. The first of which was at the city of St. Louis, where I was designing sewers, doing flow calculations by hand with a mechanical pencil and drawing sewer profiles. And my boss one day came in and said, "You look kind of bored. Do you want to take a walk out into the field and check out some of our construction activity?" And I guess that was a life-changing event for me because I never looked back. I was so lucky to get to go do some bridge inspections across St. Louis and eventually landed on the Eads Bridge project, which was a historic renovation or restoration, I should say, for the city. And it was just a great experience to be able to learn from field personnel, ask questions about construction, really get to understand what a career in construction would look like. And so fast forward to Tarlton. Yeah, I started as a project engineer on a project in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and moved on from there to build on Washington University's campus for several years. Had the fortunate opportunity to work for the federal government and some of our greatest cultural institutions in town. And looking back, all of those projects, it was all time and place, right? And opportunistic, but some of these buildings were just very complicated schedules. And I got to work with some of the greatest teams, some of the greatest customers who were never afraid to share knowledge. And so moved on from project engineer to senior to manager, and eventually had my own book of business as a director. And then from there kind of took on all of operations and kind of brings me closer to where I am today. And man, it's been a fun ride. It's still a fun ride. I'm in the middle of a long journey and I'm just loving it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love to hear stories like that. And I think one thing I want to highlight and point out to any of our listeners, especially the younger ones, is not to dismiss those internship experiences because they can become launching pads for major aspects of or sections of your career. But it's also, as I always like to tell people, don't despise small beginnings. Sometimes you have to start one place, but it will totally take you, like you said, on a trajectory that will move you in directions that you never dreamed possible.
Yeah. And what a great opportunity when you are still in school to try different types of internships and really, you may find your passion unexpectedly just because somebody asked a question or just because somebody said, hey, take a walk with me. And life is funny like that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And Sondra, I love that you mentioned fangirling out. As I was preparing for this episode, I was looking at the list of projects that you've worked on, and it's some of my favorite places, particularly the old courthouse in St. Louis. But I make a point to point out the Eads Bridge to my wife every time we drive through St. Louis. So I am equally fangirling out, and so it feels good.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So are there any projects specifically? Because again, you've been at Tarlton now 22 years. You've worked on a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of high profile projects, the old courthouse renovation, the St. Louis Art Museum, the Olin Business School expansion. How have those pretty big projects helped to shape who you are as not just a leader, but an operator?
Yeah, so I would go back to, we built as a joint venture, the National Personnel Records Facility in Hazelwood, just north of St. Louis. And that was a $90 million design build project. And we were so fortunate to have a team that came together, and we shared, as we always do when we're selecting joint venture partners or partnering up with others, just making sure our values align. Our approach is similar. And I got the opportunity to have a director on site with us full time. And I was a senior project engineer at the time. And, I'll veer off into a tangent about mentorship, but I always feel like I never ask for a mentor. I just look back and find that, oh my goodness, this person had a profound impact on my career, on my life. And I would say that was a huge turning point for me. It really this individual really challenged me in a way that no one else ever had in my career to date. And you don't get the opportunity to be sitting in a trailer with this person 12 hours a day. It was a tough project. We were there before the sun came up and after the sun went down. And, just really was very intentional about communications, played devil's advocate in any conflict resolution, just really thought through everything methodically, and kind of slowed us down to not be reactionary. And gosh, I would say that was the turning point. I was able, when we finished that project, to move on into that tough art museum project and really utilize some of those skills I had learned from this individual. But then I think the next big lift was the Olin Business School expansion. Again, another $90 million job in 18 months, wasn't fully designed when we started the job, and just having to really step up and lead the team on that project. It was a huge challenge for me. And I think just from a construction perspective, the site was incredibly tight. We were shoring 3 stories of building on that tight site. We had 2 tower cranes. And so just the really digging into the technical side of things, I think that's where, in Washington University builds 100-year buildings. They're beautiful buildings with, every detail carefully considered. There's historic buildings we were interfacing with. And so I think the best place to learn for sure is when you're in charge of a large team and you're trying to solve some complex problems. And those 2 projects were, I think, pivotal points in my career where I just dug in and learned the most.
Yeah. I love hearing that. And that it sounds exciting, right? And I think that, there's just so much going on. I'm curious to know, and I do want to back up just a second. When you were growing up, did you ever envision yourself being in this position in construction management and in engineering from this perspective? Was there somebody in your family? Was there some experience that maybe you had, young at a much younger age that kind of led you on this journey?
my father was a carpenter.
So he was a builder of sorts.
He was a builder.
Yeah.
But he then worked for the power plant. So maybe there was some subconscious recognition there. But I can pinpoint, I wanted to be an engineer when I saw the movie Apollo 13.
Ooh,
and they dumped all the parts and pieces on the table, and they said, you need to make this, fix this using only this. And I really enjoyed that movie, and I said, okay, I'm going to be an aerospace engineer. And
I like that.
Yeah, and we have this great school in the middle of Missouri, right? A great engineering school, Missouri S&T. It was University of Missouri-Rolla back at the time. And I was fortunate enough to run there on their cross-country and track and field team. And it all fit perfectly. And while there, you're exposed to all the different disciplines. And so I really honed in on what I was feeling a little more passionate about in my youth, and ended up in the civil architectural department. So
yeah, I like that. Well, and I know a lot of people aren't, like I said, I live out in this area, and I ride by Missouri S&T whenever I come from St. Louis, headed to Fayetteville, Arkansas, where Zweig Group is based. And, it is, that school actually has a pretty sterling reputation in the design industry, right? I mean, you guys, you're kind of like the Harvard of the architectural engineering, if I could use that way to describe your alma mater. But am I overselling this or no?
I mean, I am a huge proponent of the education they provide. And I say it's the best bang for your buck, but it is Rolla's a great town. It's a great small town, Midwest town. And the school just, we get some stellar engineers coming out of S&T. So thanks for the shout out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. we love doing it. It's funny because I over the years that I've worked at Zweig, in my many iterations at Zweig Group, dating all the way back to 97, and I hate dating myself, but one of the things that I think in the AEC space that it's always been important is education, even to the point where, I used to recruit for Zweig for different clients, and there would be clients that we recruited for, they would only take people from certain schools, and that's a real thing. And, when I go and look back at like different specialties, like structural engineers with the wood background, when you think of like Clemson University, and then when I think of like just pure structural engineering backgrounds, there were certain schools that different clients that we work with, they were certain pedigrees that they wanted. And I know that Missouri S&T has or offers up that type of pedigree for people that are coming out that are moving into the AEC space. And I've always found that interesting, that people tend to gravitate towards those schools that really produce some really top talent and some difference makers when it comes to thinking about how to solve problems that all engineers and architects have to do.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think, we're never using any differential equations in our day-to-day work, but the ability to think critically and solve problems is the quality that seems to come to the top when I think of graduates from these schools. But, I also don't want to hate on any other education, because workforce continues to be a challenge in the industry, we're having to look outside. We're really having to compete for these students out of these schools. And we're also having to broaden our reach and just start looking at potentially other disciplines and just looking for labor in places we haven't historically recruited from. So, and, we've been pretty successful in that. And I think that's an exciting thing. It's exposing more and more people to the industry and showing them all what the impact they can make in the industry. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Lucas, you have a question?
No, I was just going to add in that I love that approach to broadening where you're pulling talent from. I think that's something that as we move forward as an industry, recruitment and retention has been a consistent challenge for at least as long as I've been a part of Zweig Group, which I'll date myself as well as 2020, not quite 1997, but it's been a consistent challenge year over year. So I'm kind of wondering about that expanded approach to hiring. Like, you're clearly very passionate about the industry that you serve. So how do we engender that passion in other people? How do we find other people with that passion?
We have been Well, our first step was to start, networking and coordinating with universities where we hadn't historically recruited from. And we started to realize that's almost too late. And so we've been getting into middle schools and high schools now, especially in our locale, to just give presentations, just to show students, hey, there are so many opportunities in this industry and so many different paths, and we just want you to know what's out there. We've also partnered with some of our customers to set up career resource trailers in the community and have high school students actually coming out to a job site and not only learning about construction, but also exposing them to whatever, if we're building for a healthcare client, they're also exposed to careers in healthcare. So it's kind of a joint effort to get the word out on different industries and markets. And I like to think that's successful. It's a hard thing to measure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I want to key in on something that you mentioned for any design firm leader, anybody that's listening to this podcast that's wondering, what are we going to do for this next generation? And I've been saying what you just said a second ago, I've been saying for years, is that we have to get into the grade schools and start planting the seeds of the power of becoming an engineer, the power of becoming an architect, what that means, right? I mean, I can remember growing up and, when you get to kindergarten, first grade, everybody has either show and tell or they talk about what career they want to be. And people want to be police officers and firemen and fire people, but all noble positions. But, there needs to be intentionality behind how the design industry goes into K through 12 to educate young people about all of the many possibilities that exist within the design industry space for careers, because they are wide and varied.
Yes, absolutely. And also our skilled trades.
Yeah.
We're a union town, and I don't think people recognize, and maybe it's a narrative that has just shifted over time with, everybody kind of pushing, go to school, go to school, go to school. But you can have a great lifelong career in the skilled trades and bring so much value to the industry, but also really set your future family up for success. And I think that's something that we have really been trying to communicate along with, the other side of the business. And people are always surprised. They're always like, wow, that's what happens. Wow, this is crazy. And so it's a great start. Like I said, it's very difficult to measure. And I'm sure there will be some metric data that we can use in the future to see if we've made some progress.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there is. And organizations like Zweig Group and so many others in this space that have worked in the design industry for years have constantly talked about that and tried to develop different ways, creative ways that firms could continue to have that conversation above and beyond just, if this is just going to bring me new work, because every conversation you have isn't necessarily going to turn into new work. But some conversations that you have can set your industry up for success for the long term. And I think what you're describing and what we've been talking about here does make a difference. And on that same point, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about the whole succession planning that your firm went through. Everything that you're experiencing has been years in the making. It wasn't like you woke up one day and they were like, hey, do you want to be president of the company, right? Yeah. I mean, there were some individuals, I think Tracy Hart and Dick Elsperman, and if I mispronounced his name, please, it's Dirk Elsperman. If I mispronounced Dirk, hopefully I didn't mispronounce it. They obviously had a long runway in mind when they started developing you specifically for this role. What did that process feel like from the inside, right? In terms of like, when did you start to understand where things were heading?
I would say it wasn't really a process. I think that there was some, organic movement in the organization. Of course, we're really intentional about talent development, and succession planning is definitely part of that. And I'm in kind of a unique position to have the background in operations and still be leading operations and get to roll into this position. And I still have plenty of development to do in my role here. But I think it just started with conversations and started with asking the question, what does this look like? Where are you in your development plan? Where do we need to go? How do we get there? And I think in general, when all of us are looking at future leaders and high potential individuals in the company, we are really thinking about how do we turn these micro situations into leadership opportunities? How are our leaders and managers recognizing that, somebody is showing up as a leader? Maybe it's just a weekly subcontractor meeting and there's a conflict, and this project engineer handled the conflict well or didn't. And how are we using that as a learning opportunity to ask the question, how do we handle that? How could we have handled it better? How are we using that to develop people? And I think it's the same situation at every level of the organization, right? We're just trying to continue to work on development plans and succession. It's not always just a black and white answer, and it's fluid, and maybe you're not there yet on certain aspects of development, but we know what we need to work on. And so I'm sorry to be answering that in more of a general sense, but that is kind of how, things came about for me. So, and we continue to work on that succession, and I work on, in each position, each role, leadership role, what does that look like? What are our options? How are we developing this pool of talent? And it's really it's the fun part of what we do, right? Building a great team. So
yeah. Well, I mean, you said it. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think that the real question is it's not even a question. It's just an observation is that, first of all, we're all works in progress, right? And the beauty of it, what you're kind of saying to me and what I hear is that, there's actually some things that you're only going to learn once you get into the position. And that is a unique aspect of it. A lot of people think, oh, well, we've got to hire the finished product. And I always tell companies, especially from a recruitment and retention perspective, and to Luke's point, it's one of the toughest, probably the most critical challenge that this industry faces. And a lot of times when people are out recruiting, and I'm just throwing on my old recruiter hat, is that we want that perfect person. And especially when we as the hiring manager aren't always perfect in that way. And so I think it's always begs the question, well, what do you want? Do you want someone that is moldable or that can grow with a role or with a position, or do you want the finished product? Because sometimes the two are not the same.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And, it's funny because we hear the word unicorn a lot around here, and we're always looking for a unicorn. And you're right. It's a huge challenge. And we have had to, level set expectations and start to look at what are the top 5 qualities we need in a candidate. And all this other stuff is noise that we can address ourselves because that's what we do. And so I think we're guilty of doing exactly what you described there, but we've gotten better over time as we've, had experiences in the market. And it just goes back to, continuing to pound on that talent development, programming and progress and investment. And that's a huge focus for us.
It has to be. Like I tell people all the time, when I talk to design firm leaders, what can they do to either close the back door, if you will? It's just personal and professional development. If you're not personally and professionally developing your people from a 360-degree perspective, then you're missing out on opportunities to build a level of loyalty and a level of insight that only comes when people know that you really care about them as individuals, as well as by the body of work that they bring to the table.
Yeah, it's so true. And that loyalty is so critical to the organization. I know that some of the feedback we get from our customers is they're always impressed at the tenure that we're bringing to the table. And we're really proud of that. And I think that you're exactly right. It's because we care about the people. We're investing in the people. We're checking on the people. We're constantly analyzing our environment and making sure that we're trying not to overtask people. And it's a lot to juggle for sure for any organization. And we're not always going to be successful, but boy, we work hard at it.
Yeah, no. Well, like I tell all design professionals when they hang their head low is that, you got to lift your head up, because every design professional in some way, shape or form they're responsible for the built environment that we see and experience on a daily basis. So whether you're responsible for creating the design or ideating that design or actually implementing those designs into real life, I mean, everything that we see and do every day is because of the hard work and dedication and time that goes into those projects by an engineer or an architect or some type of construction management. And I say that all the time. And I have to remind people that what you do really matters, like really matters. So, it makes a huge difference.
Yes. Yeah. Every single part of our life is touched by it. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's Rainey's heard me harp on that point many times. Like everything that we see around us is touched in some way by this industry and we interact with it every day. And when I think about St. Louis, you've had a huge hand in developing St. Louis over the last 20 years. So I was kind of wondering your perspective so you mentioned developing people within the firm, leading to longer tenure, and you yourself have a 2-decade tenure. So as you come into the role of president, what's the thing that guides you forward, right? Yeah, just that simply.
Yeah, well, our mission at Tarlton is to build futures for our customers, but also for our people. And that is our guiding light. And we do that by working within our values. And I know I struggle because it sounds trite every time, right? You hear it all the time, but we actually, we don't just talk about them. We really talk about, how are we applying them to our day-to-day existence and in those micro situations I was talking about. How do we communicate with one another? How do we support one another? Our first value is build a safe and caring environment. And that's key to making sure people are happy and feel welcome and are motivated to keep moving forward. We cultivate clients for life. 80% of our business is repeat business. So, once we're working with someone, solving problems with them, we make it an enjoyable experience. And so that doesn't just help our clients, it helps our people. You want to go to work and have fun every day, right? You want to laugh. You want to enjoy your job. So we have a lot of fun. And, of course, we stand behind our word and work. It just, integrity, quality, safety is all, of course, part of our values. And then lastly, and contributing again to having fun at work, we just love what we do. I mean, come on. Like you said, it touches everything. And you get to learn about industries you never thought you'd know anything about. How to preserve paper, how drinking water gets treated and how wastewater gets treated. All of these things sound crazy, but they're fun.
Yeah. Man, there's so many different directions I want to go, but I want to stick to my outline here. I mentioned to you earlier, I wanted to talk just a little bit about, women in the AEC industry space, right? I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the elephant in the room. You personally have built a career that a lot of young women in this industry would look at as a roadmap. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I mean, what do you wish someone had told you early on about what it actually takes to rise in this space, from your perspective?
Yeah. Everyone's lived experience is different. And I would say when I started as a project engineer, there is nothing more I wanted than for people to not know that I was a woman. But I never felt like I was treated any differently. I don't feel like in my young career, being a woman affected my experience. I think being a young, inexperienced person is really what affected my experience. And I'll say at that time, I would say in general, say yes to everything when you're young and inexperienced. If a superintendent says, hey, kid, come out, let's go look at this, go look at it with them, ask questions, be curious, learn every day. When your boss says, hey, go to this networking event with me, just go. It's uncomfortable, but say yes to everything when you're young in your career so that you can strategically say no when you get into your career a little bit later. You have other commitments and, aging parents of kids at home, perhaps, self-care, whatever it is. Say yes as much as you can when you're young so that you can balance things a little better when you're older. And, I never thought being a woman affected me until I had physically changed because I was having a child and I couldn't climb a ladder anymore to look and inspect things. So that's when I first noticed it. And then, having small children at home and trying to balance the schedule and work on a little bit less sleep. And that's true for men and women. I had the pumpkin seed in the trailer on some Saturdays, that's for sure. But I don't regret any of it. And I can say to women, when your kids are young and you're feeling torn about, not spending enough time at home, or your parents are aging and you're not feeling like you're spending enough time, you have to persevere and you have to just integrate them into your work life. I explain to my kids every time I make a decision and I have some boundaries, or my mom, hey, I'm sorry I can't make it to this because I have a work event. Here's what the work event is, and here's how it affects our lives. It really just provide the why to all of them. And now my kids know, hey, I know you're there and I know why, and I appreciate you. And thanks for being an example. I think they're not adults yet, but hopefully they're strong moral adults who will appreciate this life in the future.
I mean, that in and of itself is probably worth the price of admission for this podcast episode. Because what you're saying is you even have to manage the expectations of your children, of your family. And it goes without saying, right? We take that for granted so often. And I think in the workplace, a lot of times we don't manage the expectations of our peers, much less our family members when it comes to work. And I mean, what you just said speaks volumes to why you've had such success. And while I can't, I don't know your personal life, I'm assuming that a lot of it mirrors the success that you've seen at a professional level. And I think that advice, more than anything else, is supremely helpful for anybody that's trying to navigate the waters of, a career advancement, and wanting to do the things that a lot of people want to do, be a parent and be a spouse or have a significant other in your life. And, how do you juggle all of that at the same time? And, as I like to say, life is messy, whether we like it or not. It is messy, but you can meet it with a plan, and you can try to work that plan to the best of your abilities. And I think, honestly, that's what most of us are trying to do on a regular basis. And it sounds like that's what you've kind of leaned into throughout your career.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I don't want to discount, look, everything I've done in my career is because of I've had amazing people around me, both in my professional life and my home life. And so just having great people around me, I've gotten to learn from some amazing superintendents, some amazing leaders in the industry, some trade partners who are willing to educate and put up with asking a lot of dumb questions. And so in addition to, finding your balance and persevering, just never stop learning, because building those reps and getting some tacit knowledge around all of the different things we do in the construction industry, I think is a huge contributor to the success as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Lucas, you want to add something to that? You look like you were chomping at the bit.
No, I was going to say, we've said it a million, like we've kind of danced around it, that idea of mentorship and having good people around you. And it ties into this thing that I've been thinking of is you've worked on so many projects in your career. What does good culture look like on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis, on those job sites or for those project teams, right? How do we do it the right way?
I mean, I think, from an approach perspective, we're super focused on planning, accountability, supporting one another, making sure everyone's rowing in the same direction, and making sure that we're all trying to solve the same problem. We're on the same page. And, reaching out when you need help, we make it very clear. Raise your hand if you feel uncomfortable with a situation or you're not sure how to handle it. We don't have doors on our office here for a reason, because we're always willing to help one another. And I think we're really flexible when it comes to, this is a family-owned company. And you can feel just the dedication to family, to all of the extended family, which is, we're accountable for our employees' families as well, right? We need to make sure we're sending these people home safe, healthy, and happy to their families. And you can feel that just in some of the flexibility, whether it's working hours, whether it's, events, schedules, whether it's, family outings. We bring the families into Tarleton to celebrate together. It's just, there's a lot of engagement and extension of the family. And I think you can feel that the second you walk in the door.
Yeah. I love that. And it does make sense. And, as one of my good friends says all the time, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So a good culture will go a long way. So I love that. Well, listen, you've been so kind with your time. I did want to end on this one question because we could have gone down so many rabbit holes in terms of this conversation. So what I will say is that we'll probably put a comma at the end of this podcast, meaning that we will have to pick it up at a later time. But I did want to ask you one specific question, and it's around your board experience and leadership. And this is for a lot of design professionals who are still early or in mid-career and thinking about board service in general. What would you tell them about how to get started and what to expect when they do? I'd be really interested to know your thought in terms of as you look at the arc of your career when it came to board involvement.
Yeah, I think it starts, for me at least, and this is the advice I provide at the board level as well. You really have to engage young people in those, young professionals committees and different specialty committees and start to build some emotional attachment to some of these, so to the things you're passionate about, right? And I found even with the Green Building Council, I served on some committees early in my career and it was all around education. And then there was a gap where, I couldn't serve. I didn't have time to serve. But then as time became available, I was able to return to that board and have foundational knowledge of the mission, of some of the activities that we do. So my advice would be to get involved early on a committee or young professionals club and start to network. It's a great way to network too and make some friends in the industry.
Yeah. It really is. I tell anyone that asks me, because I've actually been involved in a number of boards. And I know Zweig Group has made it a point in the recent years to really talk about what board involvement means and why it is something that any design professional should try to seek out, because it creates a much more well-rounded individual, right?
Yeah.
And I would hearken to say that you clearly have leveraged your board experience, and it has actually informed how you lead both internally as well as externally there at Tarleton. So, there is something to be said for it. And sometimes you don't get everything that you need for your career just in the 40-hour work week. And so you need to be involved. There are going to be opportunities for you to serve other needs, other people, other missions that will help to inform who you become as an individual and will create the total person that you want to see throughout your career. And I think you're a perfect example of that. And so I appreciate you, kind of sharing your insight from that perspective.
Well, thank you. And you stated that so beautifully. I don't even know how to add to it.
That's what I do. So, but no, seriously, I thank you for that. I appreciate that. But no, Sondra, is there anything left that you'd like to add before we close out? How can people get in touch with you if they're really moved by this episode or just want to connect with you, or, better yet, say, I want to work at Tarleton. And I'm willing to relocate to St. Louis if they don't already live in the Gateway City. So I would love for you to kind of share the best way for people to get in touch with you.
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn. You can always call the main office at Tarleton and find me here. And I'm happy to, if people have questions about careers in construction, if they have questions about Tarleton, if they just want to talk about the beautiful weather and how they might serve on a board, I'm happy to oblige. So
absolutely. Well, we'll make sure all of that, your LinkedIn profile, everything that any points of connection, social media profiles for Tarleton, all of that will be in the show notes for this Zweig Letter podcast episode. So we'll make sure that everybody has access to that. But
awesome.
Sondra, it's been a real pleasure. And the next time that I'm in St. Louis, because I have friends there, and like I said, it's just 5 hours from Fayetteville, I will be looking you up and reaching out to say hello for sure.
Absolutely. I would love that. And thank you so much for having me today. And If you find that I didn't answer a lot of your questions or I veered off on too many tangents, I'm happy to follow up.
You were just fine. You were just fine. So thank you again. I appreciate that. So listen, I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. If listening to today's episode sparked something for you, whether it's a conversation you need to have at your own firm, a board seat you've been putting off pursuing, or just a reminder that the long game is worth playing, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. You can find the Zweig Letter and everything related to the AEC industry at zweiggroup.com. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have new episodes coming out quite frequently, and we'll see you back here soon with another new episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zweig Letter Podcast. We hope that you can be part of elevating the industry and that you can apply our advice and information to your daily professional life. For a free digital subscription to the Zweig Letter, please visit thezweigletter.com/subscribe to gain more wisdom and inspiration, in addition to information about leadership, finance, HR, and marketing your firm. Subscribe today.